Hello everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about the client-server network, fat and thin clients, the domain naming system, which is also commonly referred to as the DNS. Alright, so to understand how the client-server network works, we first need to understand what is a network architecture. Network architecture is the way network devices are organized within a network. Alright, since we got that clear, let's talk about what a client server is. So a client server network is basically a network architecture in which each computer or process on the network is either a client or a server. A client server network is dependent on both the client and the server and requires some form of communication between them. Server is one centralized powerful computer which organizes the information and executes them in an orderly fashion. It also sends the information to the location where it was requested from. On the other side, a client is a piece of computer hardware or software that accesses a service made available by a server. Let's take a real-life example so that you understand how the client server works. So imagine you're going to a restaurant. You want something to eat. So you call the waiter and ask him to serve you the dishes you desire. Then he comes back with the food you want and then you pay him. So in this case, you will act like the client as you are the one who needs to access the information. The waiter acts like the server as he's the one with where all the information belongs, and the food acts like the information. As you can see, all three, the client, the server, and the information is necessary, as without either of them, the system would become useless. Some of the advantages of a client-server network are that they're easier to back up as the files are stored on one central network, not multiple. Also, it is easier to authenticate and control your data on the server as you have full control of all your files. Furthermore, the client-server network reduces the impact on work if a client's computer needs repair, as the files can be accessed from anywhere. You can remember these advantages in the acronym bars: backup, authenticates, controls and accesses, repairs, and security. Some of the disadvantages of the client server are that a specialist network operating system is needed. The server is usually expensive to purchase. A specialist such as a network manager is needed, and if any part of the network fails, a lot of trouble can occur. Okay, now that you got that cleared, let's talk about the different types of clients there are. So in the world today, there are two main types of clients: thick clients and thin clients. Typically, thick and thin clients are terms used to refer to the acquired hardware by a client to be able to communicate with the server. So what is a thin client in particular? Thin client normally doesn't have a lot of resources, and thus the bulk of the data processing occurs on the server side. A thin client is a network computer either without or very little computer hardware and resources, and thus very minimal processing is done on the client side. Thin clients network are designed to simply act as a terminal between the server and itself, and thus requires a constant communication with the server to process information. Since most of this processing is done on the server side, the server is usually very high spec requirement to support and process all the information being sent. Some examples of places where the companies provide high spec server for thin clients to utilize are Instagram, Facebook, and Snapchat. Thin clients are generally found in medical offices, airline ticketing, schools, governments, manufacturing plants, and even call centers. Some of the main advantages of thin clients include the fact that they're easy to install, offer a lower total cost of ownership over thick clients. Also, thin clients are more secure than thick clients because clients are protected from unauthorized software. Along with that, thin clients increase productivity as they're easier to set up. Along with that, it is much easier to be able to back up on a thin client as much of the information is located on a single server. One of the major disadvantages of using a thin client computer is that since computers are heavily dependent on the server's applications, the clients have less control over their own data. Also, data processed on the server side is much slower, and most of the times the server application lack useful options that might be available on a thin client due to its capacity to handle more data. Furthermore, thin clients are normally unreliable. For example, if a server goes down, then the data collection is halted, as the client would not be able to maintain the constant communication with the server. Now that we know what a thin client is, can you guess what a thick client is? Well, in comparison to a thin client, a thick client is a computer with enough resources to do most of the processing required by the client-server application on the computer itself. A thick client generally doesn't require to have a continuous communication with the server, thus allowing the user to work offline and online. One of the main reasons that people use thick clients is that it allows users to run resources and bandwidth-intensive applications without being able to depend completely on the server. Some of the advantages of using a fat client includes the fact that the user can work offline at any time and anywhere, as a fat client is not as dependent on the server, thus enabling a fat client to work without the constant communication with the server. Also, a thick client server doesn't need to be as resource intensive, as the thick clients do not do most of the processing by themselves. This makes the cost of the servers much cheaper as compared to the thin clients. According to research, the fat client ratio to the thin client ratio has been exponentially increasing over time and is expected to increase in the future. It is for this reason that the user can use already existing infrastructure, and thus there is no additional cost for them. Along with the various advantages of using fat client, there are also various disadvantages too. Some of the disadvantages include the fact that fat clients are usually less secure, as they're prone to virus and malware attacks. This risks all the files on the computer. Also, fat clients decrease productivity as they are only available on one device. So in case you forget your laptop with you, there is no way you can access the information on your laptop. With this, backup also gets harder, since you would have to keep a physical copy of the files and the folders on a separate hard disk, thus wasting more money and time on the backups. You can think of DNS as a phone book of all the URLs and domains in the world. For example, if you know a person's name but don't know their telephone number, you simply look in the telephone book, right? Well, a DNS server serves the exact same purpose, just on the internet. The only difference is that a DNS communicates with the devices based on their IP addresses rather than their name. Let's talk about an example. When you visit a website, let's say Google in this case, on a browser, then your internet service provider views the DNS associated with the domain name of the website and then translates it into a machine-friendly IP address and directs your internet connection to the correct website. Without a DNS, there would simply be no phone book, and thus the computer would not be able to access any information with the other devices. To conclude this video, let's talk about what usually a URL consists of. Well, an URL consists of three parts: the top-level domain, or the TLD, the host name, and the file name. A TLD is basically a domain which has the highest level in the domain naming system hierarchy. TLDs are normally found at the end of the first segment of the URL, for example .org, .gov, .com. Secondly, the host name of the URL consists of the machine name and the domain name. And finally, the file name is the thing that you are visiting. File name is normally found at the end of the URL. Let's do an example together. Pause the video and identify the top-level domain, host name, and the file name in the following website. After you have done identifying them, you can resume the video. This website, the TLD, is .org, the host name is kausara.org, and well, the file name is a bit too long for me to say it right now. Alright guys, with that, I want to end the video, and I hope you understand the basic concepts of networking now, and well, I'll see you till next time.